עצביהם כסף וזהב, מעשה ידי אדם. עצביהם כסף וזהב, מעשה ידי אדם.
Our congregation suffered a big loss this week with the passing of our past president, the late Norm Stern. I want to acknowledge the members of his family who are here today and make sure they know we're sending them our deepest condolences and that we're with you in your sorrow really as a whole community. I think it's fair to say that when Poland and Russia call out your country for moral incompetence, political ineptitude, and historical ignorance, Poland and Russia, you know you have some serious soul searching to do as a country. So I decided that I'm not going to talk about Sukkot this morning. We have 7 more days to talk about Sukkot. Instead, let's reflect on the serious soul searching that this country needs to do in the wake of a fiasco on Parliament Hill. I know this has already been said by many others, but I want to say it again. 2 standing ovations for a man who was a card-carrying Nazi who swore allegiance to Adolf Hitler, a proud member of the Waffen-SS, is not just a national embarrassment. It is not just extremely upsetting. It is not just a farce of worldwide humiliation. It is not just the biggest embarrassing international debacle in Canadian history. It is also a slap in the face of every Jew in this country and a disgrace to the memory of the 6 million victims of the Shoah. Not only the event itself, but the fact that it took 2 whole days for the Prime Minister to apologize. Not because he was personally responsible for what happened. He was not. But because he presides over the government of Canada and touts himself as, quote, a real leader. Well, this was an enormous failure of leadership. When Poland found out about this whole thing, they could not understand how a Nazi war criminal could be living peacefully in Canada for so many years. And they are calling now for his extradition to Poland so he can be brought to justice. And you know what? They're absolutely right. And when Russia found out about it, they called the incident outrageous. I quote a Kremlin spokesperson. Many Western countries, including Canada, have raised a young generation that does not know who fought whom or what happened during the Second World War, and they know nothing about the threat of fascism. And you know what? They're also right. But I would go further than the Kremlin spokesperson. This incident didn't just reveal the ignorance of a young generation. It put on grand display the ignorance of the leadership and lawmakers in charge of government in this country. Anthony Rota, thankfully now the ex-speaker, called this piece of dirt, quote, a Ukrainian hero and a Canadian hero for fighting against Stalin in the Second World War, and everyone applauded. How stupid do our parliamentarians need to be not to know that Stalin was on our side in World War II? To be this incompetent is mind-numbing. To be this inept requires stratospheric levels of ignorance and stupidity. Allow me to delve into a little bit of history, if not for the benefit of those in attendance, for the benefit of those who may watch this online at some later point. After conquering any new corner of Europe, Nazi commanders would put out a call for volunteers to sign up for the SS. The SS was the elite corps loyal to the Nazi Party that stood distinct from the Wehrmacht, the German army. There was a French SS unit, there was a Norwegian SS unit, there was a Dutch SS unit, and even SS units formed from British and American prisoners of war. And in 1943, the Nazi occupiers of what is now Ukraine recruited a unit of racially acceptable Ukrainians to bolster their invasion and subjugation of the Soviet Union. It was known as the 14th SS Division Galicia. Over the years, some Ukrainian Canadians have staunchly defended the 14th SS Division Galicia. They have falsely claimed that Ukrainians who served in the division were conscripted, when in reality, 80,000 volunteered. Only 14,000 were selected. Other apologists argue that the division fought only to protect Ukrainian territory. That is also a lie. Even a cursory glance at SS Galicia reveals its links to the Nazi campaign of destruction against Jews and the murder of innocent civilians. Its commander was Oberfuhrer Fritz Freytag, a fanatical Nazi who was directly involved in the concentration camps, death camps, and other sites of mass murder of Jews. Among the commanding officers of SS Galicia was another Ukrainian-born SS Hauptsturmführer Heinrich Wiens, who served with the Einsatzgruppen D murder squad and personally took part in the mass execution of Jews. Another division officer, SS Obersturmbannführer Franz Magal, was also a seasoned killer of Jews. All of this we have perfect records of at the Yad Vashem archives. SS Galicia worked inside the Sonder Battalion, a unit that conscripted and contained rapists, murderers, and the criminally insane, and the two organizations at times transferred officers between each unit. In addition, SS Galicia had officers and NCOs who came from the Nachtigall Battalion, a Ukrainian collaboration organization that had taken part in the mass killings of Jews in the summer of 1941. In 2003, a Polish government commission into Nazi war crimes concluded the 14th SS Galicia was responsible for the massacre of women and children in the Polish village of Huta Penaka, which was hiding Jews and cooperating with Soviet partisans. Based on eyewitness accounts, the Polish Institute of National Remembrance pointed out that members of the 14th Division entered the village, rounded up many men in a church and shot them, and then set a barn filled with all the women and children of the town ablaze. The 14th SS Galicia is also implicated in atrocities in 4 other Polish villages, and in the last year of the war, the unit was stationed in Slovakia and Slovenia, where it hunted down partisans, killed civilians, and burned down villages as part of the greater Nazi war machine. So much for this BS about them only protecting Ukrainian territory. We have records also of Himmler's speeches to the unit, where he boasts of the Jews sullying the name of Galicia and celebrates with the unit their loss. This so-called hero, Jaroslav Hanka, was not just a member of the 14th SS Galicia Division, having pledged his allegiance to Hitler. He also had no regrets about it, saying in a 2011 blog published by Ukrainian veterans that his time in the SS were, quote, two of the happiest years of my life. I understand that it takes a certain level of World War II knowledge to know about the roles and activities of the different SS divisions. The division also later attempted to disguise its origins by renaming itself the 1st Division of the Ukrainian National Army. But you should not need a PhD to know that if someone is introduced as having fought against the Russians during World War II, it means he was fighting with the Germans. It's a level of ignorance that should frighten all of us. Scottish historian Niall Ferguson put it so well when he said, "The biggest threat to Western culture is posed not only by other civilizations, but by our own timidity and by the historical ignorance that feeds it." Canada has a lot of soul-searching to do. In particular, we deserve, we need, we demand full transparency and ownership that Canada spent decades overlooking and providing official cover for the Waffen-SS Galicia Division. After the war, a disproportionate number of Galicia Division veterans, some reports have said as many as 2,000, would find their way to Canada. Immigration policy at the time was to reject any member of the German Wehrmacht or the SS, but according to a 1986 federal public inquiry into war criminals on Canadian soil, members of the Galicia Division were given a cabinet-level exemption in 1950. The Liberal government at the time found these Ukrainian Nazi collaborators to be useful allies due to their virulent anti-communism and hostility to anything and anyone associated with the Soviet Union. So Canada opened its doors to them. Among the beneficiaries of this policy was Mikhail Chomiak, the grandfather of current Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland. During the war, Chomiak served as editor of a pro-Nazi Ukrainian nationalist newspaper, Krakivsky Visti, which used publishing equipment commandeered by the Nazis from a Jewish newspaper that they had shut down. Chomiak emigrated to northern Alberta after fleeing to Vienna in late 1944 in the face of the advancing Red Army. And by the way, not a peep from Chrystia Freeland about this whole fiasco on Parliament Hill. Interesting. The decision to admit members of the Galicia Division into Canada was fiercely opposed by Canadian Jewish Congress at the time, but ultimately ignored on the basis that the division soldiers had volunteered, quote, not because of a love of the Germans, but because of their hatred for the Russians and the communist tyranny. As I said before, that's a total lie. In the early 1980s, Simon Wiesenthal sent a list of names to the Canadian government of former Galicia Division officers who were directly involved in the mass murder of Jews. A subsequent RCMP investigation would find that at least 11 of them had indeed retired, and died in Canada. Today, monuments to the veterans of this unit actually stand in this country, in cemeteries in Oakville and in Alberta, a national disgrace. As the late Irving Abella reminded us, in World War II and its aftermath, it was easier to get into Canada if you were a Nazi than if you were a Jew. We have a certain philosophy in this country that is uncomfortable with Canadian history. It prefers to apologize for and erase the more difficult chapters of our story. It even ignores the great chapters of our story, since we cynics can always find a few particular injustices somewhere in the details. This is reflected in the plan for the new Canadian passport, which will no longer contain images from Canada's history, like the Vimy Ridge Memorial. Instead, the pictures will be replaced with, quote, images that reflect Canada's diversity, inclusiveness, wildlife, and environment. In this era of disinformation and tyrannical manipulation, I cannot think of a more reckless and dangerous philosophy to embrace. If there's anything we Jews have to offer the world, it is the commandment to remember, which is the essence of who we are and how we stay grounded as a people. Sukkot is Man Simchatenu, the holiday of happiness and joy. On one hand, it's perfectly fitting, since Canada is now the laughingstock of the world. But I hope you can see that I'm not laughing, and my holiday has not started out very joyfully. We are a country dangerously lacking in historical memory. Because of that, we've made fools of ourselves, insulted a Jewish community already fearful of growing anti-Semitism, reopened many wounds, spat on the memory of the victims, perfectly fulfilling the notorious prophecy that those who cannot remember the past will be condemned to repeat it. May this be a wake-up call to all of us across this country. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.